Hi everybody, this is Ellen Fischer and I'm here today at the Center for Spiritual Care with Steven Bradbury for his solo show called Plein Air Noir. And plein air refers to his working out of doors, and noir refers to his favorite medium of graphite. And hello, Steven.
Hello, Ellen. Thank you for having me here.
Where did you come from today to be with us? Where's your usual home?
I live in Melrose, Florida, which is up near Gainesville, not too far from the Pains Prairie area where I did a lot of the drawings in the show.
Well, let's talk about those drawings. You have 12 of them all framed together in this show, and they're all from a sketchbook. Each one of those drawings measures about 2 3/4 by...
No, this is, in fact, this Quattro artist blank, and I love the Quattro sketch pads because they have a hard back, and so I often work on a on something hard, but I can actually hold it in my hand and draw with it.
Yes.
And it's a cool white paper, which takes graphite very beautifully, almost highlights it.
Right.
And the other thing is that the aspect ratio is very wide, and so I can take in a large measure of the horizon.
Perfect for landscape.
And I've done, I'd say half my drawings have been with the Quattro. If not this aspect ratio, a different one, maybe a squarer one. I really like that. And so all of the Pains Prairie drawings, sorry to disagree with you, but there are only 9 in there.
Did I say 12? Maybe I just wanted a dozen.
I tried to talk my framer to get 12, and she just shook her head and said, no, Steve, no.
See, I saw your vision without even knowing it.
Yes.
Okay.
And I have a 10th one here.
Right over on the adjacent wall.
What I did was, it was in 2018, and I live in Melrose, which is to the east of Gainesville. And so every time I had to go into town for one reason or another, I would drive down to Micanopy and then come up 441 and do a drawing. And over maybe 3-4 month period, I did 40 drawings. And sometimes 2 a day coming and going. And then I went through and I pulled 9 that would have a kind of plot. So if you look carefully at the series, it starts in the early morning, and then the top 3 are early morning drawings. They're not done at the same day.
No.
And then the middle ones are more in the afternoon, towards the afternoon. And then there was one Sunday when a storm was coming, and I thought that was just really dramatic. And then I did a couple of twilight drawings to sort of close it out. And then I had my framer frame it, and she's hated me ever since. It was such an onerous task, and it got first prize in the Gainesville Art Association.
Well, I can see why.
Yeah.
And it's all it's a landscape only a Floridian could love. It's very, very flat. It's marshy, which Pains Prairie is. And in one of the pictures, I especially like the little electrical
the power lines.
Towers. Yeah.
Power lines, telephone lines. Speaking of telephone lines, I didn't show you this earlier. It's a curved piece of metal. It's rough on one side, smooth on the other. And I use it to do telephone lines in my pictures.
It. Where'd you get that?
Because it's curved. A friend of mine was making them he's a welder, a retired welder, and he was making them. And I thought this would be great. Because, telephone wires, the weight, gravity brings them down. And they're wonderful because if you look carefully at them, the bottom is in shadow, so it's dark. The top is highly lit because it's in sun.
Exactly.
So I use this little thing, which is a cuticle blade, I guess, for pushing cuticle.
Pusher,
or the back of this pair of scissors to do the top part. I incise the paper, deboss it, so that when I then put in the sky behind it, clouds with the dirty blending stuff, it remains white.
Just like
and then
gleaming.
I come in with my ebony, which I guess is about a 6B dark pencil, and I do the shadow on the bottom. And the other thing about telephone lines is really cool is if the backdrop of a telephone line is a cloud, a white cloud, it's dark. But then when it gets against something dark, like a tree line, it's white.
Yes.
And so the same telephone line could have maybe 4 to 5 different values as it moves across the
and it's important to put that telephone line in for you, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I started adding telephone lines to my landscape drawings, people now go, wow, Whereas before they would just go,
I think it's really interesting. How long have you been drawing?
Well, I drew as a kid, and then I actually wanted to be an artist. I went to Cooper Union for a year. New York was a tough place in 1971, and I dropped out. And I kept drawing for another decade, but then I became I worked all kinds of jobs. I was a janitor in the San Francisco Museum of Art for briefly, and the San Francisco Repertory Theater. But I wound up studying Chinese because I was in love with Chinese painting and Chinese poetry. And then I moved to Taiwan, and I was a Japanese commercial translator for a number of years. Then I went to Hawaii to get a master's degree in Chinese. Then I switched to English. I got my master's in Chinese, master's in English, and doctorate. So I could go back to Asia, and I lived in Taiwan for 20 years. And during all that time, I didn't draw because I was so busy with promotion and teaching. And but I quit my job in 2015 and came back to Florida, North Central Florida, which I really love, to draw. And I've been drawing ever since. So basically, I've been drawing. I started drawing in 2016. Okay. Again, and
so half a dozen years of drawing.
Yeah, and I've drawn several thousand drawings, I think. A lot of it is life drawing. I love life drawing, and before COVID came, I would go several times a week for that. And so I've got.
So by life drawing, you mean?
Oh, I mean, drawing the nude.
Yes.
And I think that's probably my primary training because you really have to work quickly. I mean, the models can't pose usually in any vigorous pose for more than a few minutes.
Exactly.
And then learning how to, start with your geometric, sort of envelope and then work down and get everything in proportion. It took me about 4 or 5 years to really recover the drawing skills I had when I graduated, when I got out of Cooper Union.
It's not like roller skating.
No, and if I don't draw regularly, I lose it. So my earlier drawings in the show tend towards the abstract, like this one here.
I really like that one a lot.
And the reason why it tends to the abstract is because it was 2000, I think 17 or 18, and I still couldn't draw really well. So I would use tricks, and it would just be masses,
But it's wonderful. I want to tell everybody that that's called Electrical Easement off Collins Lane, and it was done in 2017, and it shows the crepuscular hour.
The crepuscular hour, as Henry James would call it. Yeah.
Yes.
He preferred the crepuscular hour.
Which is twilight. Crepuscular is a poetic term mostly.
Yeah, twilight, and that's my favorite time of day. And I think it's because I grew up on black and white television, and then I fell in love with Janus films and New Direction book covers, which were all black and white. Photography, Gustave Le Gray is my favorite photographer.
And Chinese brush painting, a lot of the best of it is done in just black ink on white paper.
Yeah, serious calligraphers and the Shanshui Hua, the mountain and river artists.
Yes, exactly.
They kind of laugh at people who use color. It's ridiculous. Black and white has everything. What do you add? What are you toying with this? Pink, green, and so and calligraphy is another reason I got into Chinese very seriously, and I basically do calligraphy every night that I'm home, and I've been doing it now, I guess, for 40 years. In Chinese characters? Yeah, and I practice characters. It's a way. It's easy to forget them if you don't practice them, but it's also every character is a lesson in composition. They're often, the directions of the strokes in the characters have a kind of pattern, like flights of birds and stuff. And I think between the life drawing and the calligraphy that's been my primary education. And that has influenced even your own landscape work that we see here. Yeah, I think so. Like this sable palm here, that's almost like a Chinese character, the angles of those. Exactly. I think that's a good description of it. I hadn't thought of it that way, but when you say it, I can see the similarities. Yeah.
Well, Chinese characters started out in the way back as pictographs, as small
Yeah,
pictures.
they did, and those are quite beautiful. And then the earlier forms of the characters are almost like, yeah, like I mean, they're pictograms or petroglyphs. You know, they're kind of
Yeah, if they're carved in the stone.
yeah, but they resemble that. So they're just beautiful
Yes.
forms. Those the early uh, uh, calligraphy forms are
I
really
think a
quite
lot of
lovely.
times an artist's chop is done in the earlier form.
Yeah, it's usually done in the earlier forms, the clerical script or what is it, the tortoiseshell forms that were used for divination.
Yes. Well,
Yeah, and you know, it's never the same. I mean, I've drawn. I mean, I've written some characters maybe 500,000 times. I don't know, but it's never exactly the same. And so every one of them, I mean, it's beautiful to look at. I usually work not with ink. I work with water on a water practice paper, and it's usually I've got like a dozen sheets of this, and they have the lines in it, so I can work in proportions. So you put it in, and then it begins to evaporate, and as it evaporates, it turns into, you know, abstract paintings. You know, like something like
a shadow of
Miro.
itself.
You know,
and then when it's completely dry, you can practice again. About the electrical easement of Collins Lane, you know, we're talking about tradition, especially in Chinese art. I mean, you can't do anything new without avoiding talking about the old, because the tradition is so strong. And you talk a little bit about tradition in this very crepuscular romantic painting as well. You talk about Corot.
Yeah, Corot,
a French painter.
Yeah, not his landscapes not his paintings as much, but his drawings, I think, are marvelous.
Yes.
And especially the charcoal drawings. I don't use charcoal.
No.
I use graphite, but he was a huge inspiration, and I've copied many a Corot drawing. Whenever I go to a museum, I always make a drawing, and if there's a Corot in there, it's usually the drawing I make. And so I got a lot of the ideas about how to do trees and leaves, and you know, Ruskin says this is impossible to reproduce a tree in its complexity in facsimile. And so what you have to do is come up with some mode of execution that by its own variety and richness kind of imitates the variety and richness of nature.
Yes,
and that's where I came up with a lot of my techniques. For example, trees in a distance. You know, it's really hard to draw trees in a distance without looking mannered. So I found this incredibly pitted eraser 6 years ago. I don't know where I got it. I think it'd been out in the weather or something like that. It has all these pitted holes on here. So what I do is I take a dirty blending stump and I get it really filthy. And then let's get a sheet of paper here. Let's see. If I can find a blank. There's a sheet. And so each side is pitted a little differently. So if you laid it down, it produces.
Yes.
You can barely see it, but
you can probably go over and over until you get the depth.
And you can. It's really great for doing something like on this cypress trunk in the Santa Fe River.
Oh yes.
If you look at the wood closely, you can see that it's kind of pitted and mottled, the way that dappled, the way that it looks very much like this, and that's what I used in order to put the dappled effects on that sunlit cypress trunk.
How long does it take you to do it? Like between how short a time can you get a drawing done for the short time drawings, and how long have you spent on a drawing of these small sizes?
Well, I've spent up to 7 or 8 hours on a drawing, but they usually look over manner. This drawing took the longest.
Those are cliffs at Étretat.
Yeah, it's actually a drawing of a photograph that was in the Monet at Étretat show in Seattle, and I didn't really like the Monet paintings that were in there. There was a Corot in there, it was wonderful, but what I really loved the most was this black and white photograph. It was anonymous, and I just loved it, and so that took me, I don't know, 7 hours. I had to go 2 days. And yeah, the guard got tired of looking at me.
Because you came into the gallery and
Yeah,
viewed
and-
from that particular
And
photograph.
I asked for a seat. You know, I had the little portable seat, and
Mhm.
so I sat in front of this thing, drawing it. You know, and that's the longest. Most of my drawings, like the Payne's Prairie drawings, are a little over with between 20 minutes and an hour and a half.
Okay.
That cypress trunk, that was probably a good 2 hours, and then. I actually remember coming down to Sean's the day after I did
Sean
it.
your friend Sean Sexton,
Yeah, he's a
another
great
artist.
painter. One of the reasons I do black and white is because he does color, and I can't compete with him. He's so good. He's just so damn good. So I came down to do the water. I hadn't done the water yet, and he gave me some advice about the water. So that's probably a good 3.5 hours, that drawing there. Maybe more. That was an hour and 20 minutes maybe. I started when it was still light, and then the sun fell, and then it turned. So I kept making it darker and darker and darker
and darker and darker.
And you know, one of the great things about working in the twilight is that you can't quite see the paper very clearly, and so sometimes you get these extraordinarily brilliant accidents. Although often I've ruined a drawing that way, but. I really like that, and then I just love that hour.
You probably like Seurat's drawings as well.
The charcoals, yes.
The charcoal
he's
drawings.
Magnificent. Yeah, he's up there with Corot, in my opinion.
He has that twilight look, even if it's broad daylight. Everything's in the gloom. Everything's in a murk.
Yeah. He's terrific. Another artist from the 19th century who was a big influence on me, although I don't paint like him at all or draw like him, is Van Gogh. And I love his drawings, the sepia ink drawings he did with a reed, like, you know, the fields, the landscapes, a little bit like Bruegel's drawings.
Although really, you know, even in his paintings, he was drawing until the last brushstroke went on. He was drawing into the paint and with the paint. And that's why his drawings, his paintings sort of hang together, so like they're locked together by the brushstrokes, which are, he was drawing with paint.
Yeah, I think you're right. Anyway, I just love the drawings. I'm not a big fan of the paintings, but I have the collection, the catalog from the drawing exhibit they had up at the Met. I'm sorry I missed the show, but I look at that book constantly.
Now you have done a few color ones, so Sean has something to worry about a little bit. When did you start doing color?
Well, I've always done color, but there's so many damn colors that
There are a bunch. Yeah.
I can never know what to do. But you know, everybody does color.
You've
there's so many
oil
and watercolor artists, and they're really good. And my artist friend Renee Guerin, I was talking to her, but I wanted to learn oil painting from Sean, and she just sort of looked at me and she just shook her head and said, "Steve, you're too old to learn oil. You know,
my.
Stick with black and white." So I do stand out.
Well, let's talk about these color ones. You used a very limited palette on two of them that are almost companion pieces that are in Yarnell, which is in Arizona.
Yes, the Yarnell series there are 4 ones. One was a graphite drawing, and they were all done from the same mountain in Yarnell, which is northwest of Phoenix. And on the top of the mountain is the Verizon Tower, and they have a concrete slab there where I can lay down my Yupo. That's the treeless watercolor paper that I do those watercolors on, and clip them on a board and lay them flat, because you have to work flat with watercolor unless you're using watercolor paper. Otherwise, everything just rolls to the bottom of the page. And so what I would do is I would just go up, it's a 40-minute hike up there, and then I would take my lunch with me, and I'd paint for a couple of hours every day. And I did I think altogether 9. I was there 10 days. And from different perspectives, but from the same hill, the Verizon Tower Hill.
One of the interesting things about, I think the one over on the left, which is on the left side on this, is view south from Yarnell, which is a watercolor on Yupo. And I'm going to say here that Yupo is a trade name for a vellum type of, it's a plastic or polypropylene type of paper.
Exactly.
So as when you say treeless, no trees were harmed in the making of this paper.
Although you wonder, when my stuff finally winds up in burn pile, what the UPO's going to do to the environment.
What color will the smoke be?
Yes.
Well, in that one you have a beautiful long view, blue into the blue distance.
Yeah, it's looking, I think, towards Phoenix. It's pretty much in that direction, and you're looking over a long valley, and I just love that. Basically, what I draw are clouds and atmosphere. Maurice Grosser is a wonderful artist and art critic.
And who is this?
Maurice Grosser, Grosser. He was very big in the 50s and 60s. He wrote a book, very popular book called The Painter's Eye, and another one called Painter's Progress. And he said, basically, you're painting air, and because the further it is, the air turns blue because of moisture and dust in the air.
Sure.
So that darks become light, lights become dark, and colors begin to vanish until you're down to blue. And I love that blueness in there. In fact, the color things I've been doing recently have all pushed towards blue. In fact, I have a whole journal of blue pastels where I was doing the sky in blue. I prefer graphite, but I'm trying to push a little bit towards pastel, like I did with this one here.
Like this one, which is on George O'Keeffe's ranch?
Yeah, it's in Abiquiu. It's one of the sedimentary walls that she painted many times. It's right near the...
I recognize them.
Yeah, and it was I stayed there for 3 days with a friend, and it was absolutely wonderful to see the exact rocks where she painted, and to position myself in the same place where she sat and painted. And I actually never got to go straight because there was a tour there, but I wanted to draw this.
Yeah, I think you chose wisely.
And then after I finished that one, I turned around and did a black and white drawing of one of the mountains that she loved to paint. But I would love to live there. That's a magnificent place.
It is gorgeous.
Yeah, I did maybe 10 drawings when I was there.
And speaking of tradition, you're not a person who's afraid to do something that somebody else did. I mean, even George O'Keeffe, I think it's a lot, your Chinese training probably comes into that, where the masters are revered and emulated, maybe not copied.
Well, everything we learn as a child, we learn by imitation.
That's right.
And by trial and error, and by quantity. A child falls, 900 times before it learns how to walk, and every time it falls, it's learning something. But it's doing what its parents did, and then the same thing with language. It repeats what it hears, what he or she hears. And so that's the way the Chinese learn. They learn to write poetry by memorizing 100 poems, and then you wind up replacing all the words. Or you leave a few in to let you know what the source was.
Exactly.
So you pay tribute to tradition, but you've made so much difference in the work that you can call it its own thing. And I think all great art reaches back to the past. And if it doesn't, it's, I don't think we can understand it. It's just a kind of fashion,
I agree with that.
I have maybe both feet in the past.
I agree. I think that's a wonderful thing. Thank you very much, Steven, for talking to us today. And again, this is Steven Bradbury. I'm Ellen Fischer. Thank you for visiting us here at Center for Spiritual Care.